is the trans person in your life?
The trans person in my life is my ex-husband, who is also the father of my child.
Oh, wow. When did you guys get married?
We got married back in 2014, so about 10 years ago now.
And when did he start identifying as trans?
2022 is when he told me.
Did you have any idea that that was going to happen?
Not a clue. It was a complete surprise.
Interesting. So, do you think that had anything to do with the pandemic and everyone being online for about 2 years?
I think so, and it was also aligned with when he got a new job that was 100% virtual work. So prior to that, he was working for a local firm. So he'd go into the office and see people. And then with the pandemic, he also resigned from that position and took a position with an overseas company. So his work became 100% online.
I'm just curious, does he work in like computers, programming, anything like that?
Of course he does. Yes, IT.
So do you think that this is a case of autogynephilia or latent homosexuality?
Um, I guess in my particular case, it is confusing because he is currently dating another man. So, so he's in a relationship with another man now. So, it's confusing, but he still identifies as a woman. So that's a point I've wondered about myself, and I don't have the knowledge to expand on that anymore.
So is he still involved in your life because you guys have a child together, or is it just completely like you stopped talking after your divorce?
Unfortunately, we are still involved because of the child.
Ah, and how has his new identity impacted his parental role?
Um, he was very distracted initially. So when we got divorced back in 2022, when we separated in 2022, and then formal divorce took a couple of years thereafter because of the laws here. He was very distracted with his new life, and he paid very little attention to the child. But he still wanted access to the child, so it was a few times a week he had access to the child, and unfortunately, legally, there's nothing like I could do to prevent that. He's still the rightful father of the child. So initially, this is my, I guess, seeing it from my point of view. He seemed distracted, but just over 2 years down the track now, he's look. How should I put it? He sees his child, but his identity comes first and foremost, if that makes sense.
How old was your kid when he decided to identify as trans?
As a son is a boy, he was 3, and now he's 5.
Does your son still view him or call him father, or is he insisting that he's also your son's mother?
I firmly said he cannot be the mother. Now, that's not a legal thing. I can't enforce it legally. As far as I know, because we don't talk outside of whatever needs to be discussed in relation to the child. As far as I know, he's not insisting on being mother. However, he wants to be called something different. Our child still refers to him as dad, and I continue to refer to him as dad when I talk to my child, like, that's your dad. But my ex wants to be referred to by his new name.
I've always found that to be so interesting how the men who they do this thing where they identify as trans. I'm a woman now, and they don't seem to have any concern as to how that will impact their family. Like when I was coming out as gay to my parents, and many of the people I know who came out as gay to their parents or their families were very, very concerned about how it would impact their relationships with their siblings, their parents. And that was often a reason why so many people still remain closeted to an extent, or if they do come out, well, my mom did not want to hear about who I was dating or anything like that for years. Even now, like, it's pretty much we don't talk about the details. Like, and also there's sort of an understanding of the need for space and for taking baby steps, like coming out. Okay, maybe your parents won't automatically be like, we love you, this is fine, but you're willing to take the attempt. And I feel like it's interesting how self-centered it is to be married, to have a child, and not even consider the impact.
100%. So in my case, he did not consider the impacts at all. In fact, we had a pretty horrible marriage after our son was born, mostly because of his jealousy towards the son. His common complaint was I spent too much time with the son and not him, and I didn't, attend to his needs like I did before. And so when he told me that he has this new identity, and make no mistake, he told me, he didn't ask, he didn't discuss, he told me. That was it. He had planned everything behind my back. He had a whole new wardrobe. He had everything set up, good to go. I was the last to know, and he just changed overnight for me. And he didn't care. But I think our son at the time, he was 3. I don't think he really understood, and I still don't think he really understand the impact. And I honestly don't know enough about children of these type of men to know how the child would continue to view the situation into the future. It's hard to know where his head was, and it's also this funny thing, and you might find this similar to when you talk to women who were in abusive relationships. When you're in it, you don't realize it. It's after you've left that relationship and you look back, when you have that overview and the hindsight, you see, oh, maybe that was a red flag that I missed at the time. His excitement for the pregnancy didn't seem genuine. Now, looking back, I didn't notice it at the time. I thought he was excited at the time. But looking back, perhaps I see that it wasn't particularly exciting. In fact, what excited him was that he liked the attention that came to him because of the pregnancy. But if it actually had to do with me, he didn't enjoy that part.
Well, that brings me to a second question. Do you think that he's always been sort of someone who enjoys being the center of attention?
Yes. Yes, unfortunately, that is something I see very clearly now, and I didn't 5-10 years ago. And that's a lesson learned for me.
So, was your husband's identity change what brought you into the gender critical community? Or were you already kind of aware of this kind of stuff beforehand?
No, no, not at all. This is what they say has piqued me. Honestly, before that, I was very naive, perhaps like the majority, and which is why I do have some level of sympathy for some people who don't understand, because I didn't understand. I thought it was a very small group of people that had this massive conflict within that they've experienced forever, and I thought they're very vulnerable, which is what the narrative is. I thought they're very discriminated against. I thought their lives were hard, and after my experience and being obviously watching him and watching the new people that he hang out with, which I don't have, very deep involvement with, but I see because he's got a new boyfriend and all the rest of it. That narrative is just completely false. It's the opposite. It's absolutely the opposite. He's had nothing but support here, and not just from family and friends, but institutions, the legal system, his work. He got promotions after coming out. So absolutely, it's completely false to say that all these individuals are so oppressed and marginalized.
So after he decided to come out to you as a trans woman, what happened after that? How did your family and friends react, and how did you end up kind of separating from him?
So when he first came out, like I said, he didn't give me any time to process it. He didn't discuss it. He told me this is how it's going to be. I asked him to slow down. At the time, in my head, I was trying to save the family, which I thought was the right thing at the time, and it was hard to comprehend something like that, especially because I had nothing to suspect that type of announcement. I honestly, he must have done a very good job hiding, or I was very naive and distracted with a baby. So I asked him to slow down, and that was just out of the question. He threw the standard. If you don't allow this, I will have to kill myself. That's my only option in life now. It's either I live as a woman or I can't live at all, and you'll be responsible if you don't let me do it. Very manipulative now that I look back, but you have to understand when you're in the thick of it, it's very, very different, the mental state. I'm a lot better now, and it was a very difficult 2.5 years. So like I said, he already had a whole new wardrobe stashed away elsewhere. He had prosthetic body parts that he would, wear under his clothes, underwear, makeup that he had bought for himself. So he was very quick to change, and it was very, very, very uncomfortable, to say the least. It was this bizarre experience of just scared. I was scared of him, and it was just, I can't even express it. It was odd. So I didn't stay. I kept going in and out of home. I started staying at my parents' house, and eventually I moved in with my parents because he started getting violent towards me because I wouldn't call him a she, etc. So he started getting a bit physical with me, and he started breaking my stuff in anger. He went from breaking stuff to punching the walls. It went to kind of punching me, and then that's when I just left and never came back to the house. That's how the marriage ended, basically. And then I stayed with my parents for about maybe a bit over half a year, maybe 8 months or so, and filed for divorce. And the process itself takes some time. I know it's different from country to country, but where I live, it could take any number of years, but in my case, from the time I filed, about another 18 months or so. It took about 2 years, just a bit over 2 years, from ending the marriage by separating to actually formally the legal paperwork, divorce.
Were you able to report to the police that he was physically abusive? Like, were you able to get any kind of protection from the law because of his behavior towards you?
Yes, I reported it to the police, and the police attended the scene. But unfortunately, for whatever the reason, they were sympathetic towards him, and it didn't even affect our settlement with divorce. Even though there was a police record of it, but that's all. There was no other consequences, and he's very wealthy. his job, he's got a lot of money, so we both engaged divorce lawyers and started fighting for the child custody arrangements and financial separation, how to split our money. And it cost a lot. So I did we ended up settling outside of court, mostly because it would have been even more expensive to take it to court. And it was also taking a toll on my mental health. So I had to, at some point, cut my losses when it comes to financial separation and say, well, that's enough. Let's just, call it a day.
Well, I am so sorry that you went through all of that. I guess I'm not really surprised that the police took his side because that's basically how it always goes. The police tend to take the side of the abuser because the abuser tends to be a man and they can see from his perspective how a nagging wife or how a woman could be annoying enough to justify violence. But the fact that you had to go through all of that, that's so awful. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. It was very hard. And I think probably the hardest is so, like, ordinarily, I would think you go through an abusive situation and you come out and you go to therapy, you have police and the legal system that might help you somewhat. But in this case, everybody was very sympathetic towards him. Even the therapists, encouraging me to see things from his point of view, or rather, quote unquote, her point of view, because everyone was very quick to jump on the pronoun bandwagon. So it was probably the most heartbreaking and an awakening, I suppose, in a way. And it was also like I was, like I said, I was quite naive perhaps before. I didn't realize how tilted the system is against women, even now. And then you add the gender ideology on top of that, and we all know how that doesn't favor women that well, right?
Still, I find it so confusing how, I mean, when you marry a man and you're a woman and you're heterosexual, which, like, you married a man, and I always find it interesting how a lot of these guys really want to have support from their wives and they want to cosplay as lesbians and they want to maintain the emotional and household support from their wives or families, but they want to do it on their own terms. And yet, from an outside perspective, you would think, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I want to become a therapist, because I know that there is a huge gap in therapists who are gender critical or coming from a feminist perspective. Because as a woman who's attracted to men, you would want your husband to remain your husband. That seems like a very obvious reason for a divorce. Like, that's not the terms that you got married on.
Absolutely. And I should add, where I live, certain jurisdictions limit the ability for therapists to provide the necessary support for people who are not the transitioners. So where I live, there's legislation in place that says you cannot have to do affirmation only model. So even when you're talking to the children and the ex-partners, or I assume any other family member of these people, they have to be supportive or affirming of the transgender identity. And I'm not sure what the consequences would be, but I would imagine that if someone complained, they could lose their license. So there's some therapists are forced, I would imagine, to affirm, even if that's not what they truly believe in on the inside.
And you're located in Australia, where they just had the Tickle v. Giggle case and the ruling that women basically don't exist.
Exactly. So, yes, wonderful place to live these days. Yeah, it's a very funny place because I mean, a lot of the again, 2 years into my journey as a gender critical slash radical feminist perspective, I've realised Australia has passed so many laws in relation to transgender and gender ideology that people aren't aware of. I don't know too much about the politics and the political side of things, so I don't know how they past these things, but often on YouTube and social medias, you hear things from America and Europe or the UK, but Australia is very like, we seem to have passed so many laws without no one noticing.
Well, after your experience, were you able to connect with people who had gone through similar things? Did you find a community of people who believed or had experienced a similar situation?
It was difficult. It was difficult. I didn't find it straight away. And it was really difficult because a lot of my friends, you know, they were sympathetic towards my ex as well. And while they were trying to be sympathetic to both of us, it was difficult at the time to hear it, like to hear why I should be sympathetic towards him at all. So I did somewhat distance myself from those friends. And so I felt particularly isolated because of that. Not only I lost a husband, but I also felt like I lost a number of friends.
Did they believe you about experiencing domestic violence, or did they assume you were exaggerating or something?
They believed that I experienced domestic violence, but I've had a couple of friends say I shouldn't have provoked her like that. I should have just affirmed her, and it wouldn't have escalated. I had people say, you should feel privileged that she chose to come out to you at all. I should, if it's hard for me, imagine how hard it must be for her. So those were the typical comments I got that I didn't. And at the time, I wasn't gender critical. I hadn't researched into other people's similar experiences. I hadn't, I didn't know what I know now. But even then, that just didn't sit right with me. So that's when I kind of reached out a little bit more broadly online to certain groups on Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, and the like to see, well, hang on, let's see if there's other women that feel the way I do, that something's not right with this whole men becoming women just by saying that they are. So yeah, it's a really bizarre thing to you had a child with this man, which is like the most biological thing you can do, right? When it comes to female and male, like that is the basic fundamental separation of male and female is the reproduction. And you have this child, and then he's the father, and it's like, one day, I'm a woman. Oof. Like, what am I supposed to say to that? Looking back, I laugh, but at the time I was horrified, heartbroken. But it's really bizarre.
I just can't believe that anyone would hear what you'd gone through and was like, you shouldn't have provoked him, as if there's any justification to being violent towards another person. And in any other context, a disagreement would not be a justification for abuse. Like having a debate with my dad on race or on sexuality and he decided to punch me, that would not be a justification that anyone would say, "Oh, well, you shouldn't have provoked him." Like that's such a victim blaming stance to take. And do these people consider themselves to be like liberals, like moderate people?
Very, very, very left leaning, very, very pro gender ideology, as I found out through the process. But I was, like I said before all this, I didn't look into this, and I supported LGBT rights, and I still do the same-sex rights. Now I don't support the extra things that come with the group. But at the time, before this happened, sorry, not at the time, but prior to this, I thought they were all very. I didn't think. Obviously, I didn't think. I thought they were all very similar. They're all, struggling for equal opportunities. So I thought like that was the right thing to do, the morally just thing to do, and that's what all those friends at the time believed as well. But when this happened, I guess through experience, I realized a big difference between same-sex attracted versus the identity side of things. So yeah, all those friends that I had, they were very left-leaning, probably quite left-leaning, and that was their belief. And I had like number of them say, it's not that she didn't love you or she doesn't love you, it's just something she has to do, like something she has to. It's not like she can't control it. And that was the other bizarre thing. Like the moment from the time I told his friends, they just immediately started using she. Like when my friends were talking to me, my ex-husband not even around, but yet they're using the pronouns she. Like these are private conversations just with me, and I'm using he, and they, by choice, they're using she. So that was also very confusing to me at the time.
I do find that so interesting how even when the person is not in the room, people default to using preferred pronouns, which is something that you have to make an active choice to do.
And as far as I know, he didn't even ask. As far as I know, these are my friends. I like some of these women I'd known before I was married. Like they watched me through the relationship with this man, attended our wedding, and now like I tell them this happened, and then soon they've swapped to she pronouns.
It's so frustrating realizing how deep the thought control goes because the thing about pronouns, right, is you're not there when they're being used. You are, by the nature of pronoun usage, you're not being addressed. So, what does it matter how other people refer to you when you're not even in the room? And yet, people will, as if there's a specter of the person there, someone there who's going to judge them for not participating. Gotta use the correct pronouns.
And these were very like private conversations, one-on-one. So there's not even a third person that might go and tell the other person or anything like that.
Just very, very odd. And I mean, on one hand, I do get it when it's cases like I've done some interviews with people who have siblings who identify as trans, and very much that fear of weaponized suicide threats, right? And when it comes to younger people, siblings, I understand that you go along with it because you care about the person and you think it's worth the concession to maintain that relationship. But when it's not even like someone in their lives, someone who they genuinely care about just out of obligation, geez. And I'm curious, since you went through all of this, do you maintain any of these friendships, or are they very distant now?
Um, they're very distant now. If like a couple of them probably non-existent. Like there's nothing. I mean, we didn't have a fight over it or anything. It's just slowly distancing myself, and that's conscious and sometimes not conscious because I have formed new friendships over the past 2 years, connecting with more like-minded women locally. So it's they're definitely very distant at the moment.
I know that some people have mentioned falling out with friends and family because of changing views on this perspective. Now, do you think that it's worth trying to maintain relationships with people who disagree on the very basic stance that sex is immutable? Or do you think it's better just to go ahead and rip the band-aid off and abandon those kind of connections?
That's an interesting question. I think it's very case by case. Obviously, if a certain friend or a family member is causing you a lot of mental instability or mental anguish by arguing with you constantly, perhaps like for your own sake, it might be better to rip the band-aid, right? Because I think you got to take care of yourself. Like one thing I learned is like nobody's coming to take care of me. I have to take care of myself. So I think it's very case by case. I mean that like I look at myself. I mean, fair enough. I went through this experience, but people can change because I was very left leaning, and I'm still left on other issues, I suppose. So people can certainly change their opinions and views, so wouldn't give up per se, but I think it's very case by case. You have to take into consideration the impact on your own life first and foremost. And if you feel like you can handle it and maintain those relationships and stand your ground, then do it. But if it's taking too much of a toll on you, then you got to look after yourself.
Was anyone on your side from the start of his coming out? I know you said you stayed with your parents for a bit. I would assume that your parents took your side all the way, as one should with their children. But was anyone else on your side or understanding of your perspective?
Some of my work colleagues have been really supportive, so which was, surprising because I never really sort of shared too much of my personal life with work colleagues, but I did have to tell a couple of them. Well, I mean, I had to. All of them know that I'm divorced now, but some of them know the reason, and they were quite supportive in a pleasantly unexpected way. I also found a lot of solace in work because I guess perhaps it was a type of distraction. Throw myself into work a little bit. So my parents were supportive, but I think they don't understand the state of things because they are a lot older from a different generation and they don't understand how bad it is. For instance, they don't understand why the state would allow a man to just do this. They don't understand how, like, when I tell them, like, these, like the tickle versus giggle case, when I share that sort of news, like, these are the things that are happening, they just don't believe it because it's, to them, this is so far-fetched, so out there. They're like, but how? Like, why? How could this be? To them, it seems impossible, all this. So they are supportive, but at the same time, it's hard to I can't have like a deep conversation with them about the state of things because they don't understand. They just say, like, how is this possible? And I go, yeah, I know. How is it possible? But yeah.
Yeah, I found that I've definitely found that talking about this stuff with my mother, she does not get it. It does not make sense to her in any way, shape, or form. Because to her it's like, well, obviously a man has a penis and a woman has a vagina. Duh. But you try to explain.
Especially, like, you have to understand when you fathered a child, which is like what the male gametes do. And then now he's a woman, make it make sense.
It is absurd. That's the thing though. I think it's interesting seeing the generational divide because a lot of people do the thing where they assume over a certain age you're automatically bigoted, you're automatically a bad person, or automatically just uneducated. So there's this weird generational divide where it's like, oh, someone's in their 40s or 50s, duh, they don't get it. And that's how a lot of younger people kind of view it. But the divide also illustrates my mom's generation didn't have to argue what a woman was when they were asking for the ability to open up a credit card or to have no fault divorce or any of those things because they knew what a woman and a man were. You didn't have to have this prelude to arguing for women's rights or whatever by first defining what a woman was. And so now when you bring up these things, it's like, well, this is common sense. It's so absurd that we're in a position where we have to have any of these conversations where you go online and someone will say men can get pregnant and it's like all I can do is just sigh so heavily. It just weighs on me. I know some people are good intentioned, they don't mean it in a they just haven't looked into it enough. They're the ones who aren't educated. They haven't looked into it. But also, Jesus Christ, I feel like I'm surrounded by idiots sometimes.
Yeah, and there's a lot of fear with people, I think. I don't know what they're afraid of exactly. For example, when I said my friends at the time were using she pronouns for him, even when it's private conversations just with me. Like, I think that kind of thing is governed by fear rather than necessarily compassion. I don't know. It has to be like they're afraid to say he. They're afraid, and I don't know what they're afraid of. I know a lot of people don't want to talk about it because it's one of those taboo topics you don't talk about.
Well, my theory is that a lot of people view this as like, first off, the internet is a thing now, obviously. And there's been cases where someone said something offensive back in 2005, and because, MySpace and Facebook and whatever are around, they don't have the ability to grow as a person without someone digging in their past, finding some proof of you're a bad person, and then throwing that in their face. Like when there's this long, permanent history of every stupid thing you've ever done. And there's also this punitive mindset where you're not allowed to grow and say, oh, no, I changed my mind on this topic. Then there's a fear that what if I'm on the wrong side of history? And instead of thinking it through themselves, so many people don't have a secure sense of self. I don't worry when someone says you're transphobic or homophobic or misogynistic or whatever, because I know I'm not. I have my morals, I have my beliefs, and I know why my values are the way that they are. But so many people do not have that security of identity, and I think that that's part of why people go along with it because they assume that the majority must have looked into it. The majority must be what's right, and so they'd rather go ahead and be part of the majority. And hopefully that would also give them a shield to hide behind if the tide does turn. Oh, it wasn't my fault that I didn't look into Amber Heard and Johnny Depp case. Everyone else also believed this bad wrong thing. And they don't want to risk leaving this herd of people, the protection of being in a group, to actually think it through themselves.
So I should, I guess, maybe I should also add with my story, my ex-husband at the time, he got hormone treatment pretty quickly as well. So there was a very, very like, it was very easy to access. It was 1 or 2 GP visits. And because that was like within, like straight after he told me he was this new person, he had already doctor's appointment booked for the coming weeks. So even though our marriage was kind of very shaky at the time, we were still married, and I was talking to him, and he got hormone treatment within a matter of like 4 weeks ish, and he didn't need any special evaluations. It was informed consent is what he told me. Like it's based on informed consent model, and so he started that very soon. So there was no baby steps. There was definitely no baby steps. It was very, and that's like I don't know how much he's done behind my back over the years because it was all new to me. So it was very very quick to me. So I found that very interesting as well, and that was quite the opposite of what I had heard through the main narrative of like, people have to wait years and years just to see someone about these issues, and it's so hard, and it's like this anguish, which is not what happened to him at all.
Yeah, I've noticed that trend is in the US, they have the Planned Parenthood clinics, and people have tested it out where it's like they just go and they get a prescription and that's it. And even if they do mention comorbidities, for example, a lot of women have like a history of PTSD or depression or sexual abuse, the people who hand out these prescriptions don't look into it. They just go, oh, you're trans? Well, here's what'll happen. If you're a girl, you get deeper voice and body hair and this, and they don't go into the longer term impact. Even when they say informed consent, it gets on my nerves so much because the truth is, they're not getting real informed consent. There's a lot of stuff we still don't know the answers to. And if they're being truthful, then these medical professionals would say, we don't have enough longitudinal studies about puberty blockers or testosterone use to be able to give you a very clear picture. Or they ignore stuff like with women who take testosterone, the fact that their health declines super fast. They don't go into detail about this and they still say, yep, informed consent. They knew what they were getting into. And then if anyone detransitions, they love to throw that in their face. You knew what you were signing on for. They really didn't.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the thing. The doctors, they try to avoid the lawsuits, don't they?
Do you think this experience has kind of given you a distrust of the psychology and medical fields?
100%. 100%. And it's, I think, well, I was going to say it's a shame, and I don't know if it is a shame, but 100%. And it's really hard. Like, even though I had to see a therapist over the past 2.5 years for myself, and I had to go through a number of them to find someone that I kind of sat well with. And they, like, the therapist that I'm seeing, she still won't criticize my ex, but we're a bit more further that I don't feel the need to like talk about the divorce and the ex so much. Like, we're working on other things for myself. So, but there's definitely a bit distrust, and I feel like um, you know you just pay the money and they'll tell you what you want to hear, because that's what I feel like they did with my ex and the people like him. So then I think, well, maybe that's what they're doing with everybody. So we all go to therapy to pay, but all they do is just affirm, which is not really what you want from a therapist, right? You want to be able to understand your issues and fix them. And if your thinking's going down the wrong path, like, I would want someone to tell me that instead of just affirming everything that comes out of my mouth.
Definitely. I love psychology because it's such an interesting field. But there are so many gaps in the way that it's currently being used, where it's just affirmation and minority stress model, which is supposed to state that being a minority is what causes comorbidities in minorities. So because, for example, you're Black in America and facing racism, that's why you have higher depression, anxiety, this, that, and the third. Which, on one hand, yes, if you are dealing with issues like poverty or racism or whatever else, that definitely will tie into stuff like depression and anxiety. But it doesn't mean you can't also have those mental illnesses for other reasons. And I definitely think that when it comes to the speed at which gender ideology has taken over both the regular medical profession and psychology, even once this tide turns, so many people are going to and are already suspicious of these fields. And it's fascinating that a lot of people love to look down on those who are suspicious or who believe in these in conspiracy theories almost. They look down on them as if they're unintelligent. But when you're looking at pattern recognition and you look at stuff like, oh, my husband went and got, HRT within 4 weeks, obviously you're going to be suspicious of the rest of the field. That's just kind of how it works. It would be nonsensical to not draw conclusions from the patterns that you're witnessing.
Mm. And I also wonder with my ex, we know there's autogynephilia and we know there's homosexual transsexuals. And I just wonder, and this is just my theory, if sometimes men feel like they're not in a minority group and they want to be in a minority group. And they might have some autogynephilia. I don't know, maybe they develop it, maybe there's dormant in there. And maybe that's like another reason some men transition, because now they're all of a sudden in a minority group.
Honestly, with how we've been shifting to focus more on minorities to try to rectify patterns of oppression, it's been people love to say, for example, that like rights aren't like pie. There's enough for everyone. Well, no. Um, Men have historically had the right to abuse women. So when feminism makes strides, men therefore have to give up the privilege or the right to be able to control their wives or children or to abuse them. And so that kind of framework ignores that there is a justification that many men have for opting into a minority group, be it by identifying as demisexual or whatever, or non-binary or trans. There is a justification or a reason to follow through with that kind of identification for certain. Awesome. So I don't want to keep you on too long, but I did want to go ahead and ask you one final question. What would you say to other women who are experiencing a similar journey with their husbands identifying as a woman?
Some women might not want to hear this, but don't stay with him. It's not going to be good for you. It's not going to be good for the children. It's not going to be good to stay together for the sake of the children, because what he's doing is abusive. It's emotional, mental abuse. Often there's financial abuse because they spend a lot of money on their transition and all that things. So you certainly don't want to get caught up in that. And it becomes very much about them, and it'll revolve around their needs. So my advice would be to just put yourself first and your children, if you have any, and it's not a bad thing to put your own needs first. I think a lot of the times women are made to feel like we're bad for putting our own needs ahead of others, but you need to be strong and healthy, especially if you have children, and just look after yourself and don't feel obligated to stay.